the Forged and Unbroken podcast.
I don't know about you, whenever I leave the like a conference like the one we were just at with training days, you kind of get that reinvigoration going again to getting back to work.
Yeah,
you feel that?
A little bit of both, right? Like I came back, my ass was on fire on Thursday morning, going through the weekend, but I also go through that little bit of like post hanging out with good dudes hangover.
Yeah.
Because then you come back to the guys that maybe you don't necessarily want to work with, or if it's your choice you wouldn't hang out with, where you spending a week with rock stars, and then you kind of come back and you're like, grind on you,
I feel that. I totally feel that though.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I got back to work. I had the opportunity to get leave this weekend also and get like another day. I was like, nah, I need to get back. I'm ready to hit the ground running,
Yep. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
And we got stuff going on. We're trying to get more money in the budget. So I got a meeting tonight, Wednesday night about that. And we're putting together promotional exams. So working with the deputy on that. So we got a bunch of stuff going on. So it's kind of good. There's a lot going on, but yeah, definitely. It's weird. Like you said, I definitely feel like I felt good. My batteries are recharged coming back, but I also feel like, man, all those dudes were awesome. It was such a good experience that it's kind of, all right.
Yeah, right.
Back being nothing to nobody right now.
Right. Yeah, man. Well, hey, so I didn't realize Harwich, Mass. You are in the Cape Cod Peninsula. Is that correct?
I am on the Cape Cod Peninsula. You got that.
Okay. Yeah, I had no idea. I figured I see all your beach pictures. I just assumed you were, on the water, but I guess that's a lot of Mass, right?
If you're looking at Cape Cod, I am almost to the elbow.
Nice. Yeah, very cool.
To the elbow. And that's what Jess Rudzinka usually does, because I schooled him one time, so he's always my map. Like he puts up his arm, he's like, yeah, he's right here. So yeah, almost the elbow. It's nice. It's a nice spot. I mean, what sucks is like it's nice living here, and don't get me wrong, I love it, but you're surrounded by the ocean. So we're always about 10 degrees colder than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It takes forever for spring to get here, and then when it does, it's summertime. It's just like it's like bang. So
yeah.
That part kind of sucks, but and then it's a freaking just a total. The place dries up in the wintertime. Nothing goes on. It's nobody's here because it's a resort. Our population in the wintertime is about 13,000. It's 40 something in the summertime.
Wow. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So you have like the influx of people. Like you are definitely a summer town, for lack of better words. And how does that affect what you guys do? Are you upstaffing? Does it change anything at all? You just status quo?
No, status quo. We used to see like a huge spike in the summertime of runs. We just do different runs. So summertime we do stupid people runs, car accidents, trips and falls, drunk people, all that stuff. Wintertime we do old people runs, because in the wintertime the majority of the population is, we're like the highest concentration of over 65 in the state.
Oh wow.
On the Cape. So we're I think the town of Orleans, which is next to us, is about 70% over 65.
Oh, geez.
So our base population is elderly. In the summertime, they're less needy because their family's all here visiting, because who doesn't want to come visit grandma when she lives in the Cape?
Right.
But then wintertime, the family all leaves because who wants to be here in the wintertime? So now she's alone, so she needs support. So the fire department becomes that support.
Yeah, for sure.
We see that that shift kind of go back and forth, but. No, it's I don't know. It's cool. It's nice because it's a change, right? You do different calls. Winter times we get our wintertime fires like anybody else, and because of where we are, we do like our run cards going. If you're looking at the elbow again, on a reported building fire, we go from the town of Dennis, which is right next to us to the west, all the way up to Eastham, which is about halfway up the upper part of your forearm. That's on a reported fire.
Okay.
Working fire, we're going as far as Wellfleet, which is one more town up the forearm, and all the way to Yarmouth. So it's crazy how much, but that's just the way the nature, because nobody's got any manpower. So that's just the nature of the manpower and how we run.
Sure. So if you're like the last engine on the box alarm, like I don't know how many engines you got, like 450, whatever that would be. How long is that response time? Just roughly.
East Ham for us door to door is 20 minutes all day long.
Yeah, it's a good run.
I mean, I've worked in fire in Provincetown. Our ladder goes to cover. If I get in my Chief's car in the driveway and put it in Google Maps, it's a 40-minute response time.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good haul.
I'm like, pack a freaking lunch and a cup of coffee and find a place to pee on the way because it's going to be a long run.
Right. It's going to take you a minute.
Yeah. So it's crazy, how far. And, this whole area used to be predominantly call firefighters. And then they started the ambulance. We started adding career. The call firefighters fell away. Towns used to be able to handle really almost to a second alarm internally. So we were really heavy, really robust. And run cards didn't, like Harwich wouldn't go much farther than like Dennis, Chatham, and Brewster for a working fire.
Mm-hmm.
That would be it. Now we're going 7 towns away on the report of a building fire. It's crazy.
Wow. Jeez. Now zooming out even further with the traveling that you're doing up and down the East Coast, conferences, whatever. What are some of the major differences you're seeing with, like, I'm assuming you would consider yourself New England, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some major differences between New England culturally for the fire service compared to other places you've been East Coast? Like when I haven't done a lot of traveling up there, all I think is like everything's Victorians, right? Victorians, and then the fog coming off the water for the New England, water towns.
Yeah. So our mixture is, a lot of old sea captains' houses, which are, Queen Anne's style, heavy wood frame, not heavy balloon frame, a lot of post and beam construction.
Okay.
Not like modern post and beam, like old school post and beam. So it's post and beam, and then it's lath and plaster over that.
Yeah.
So you don't have the unprotected void spaces like you would in balloon frame, but it's still wood frame, big timbers, burns, plaster and lath is, New England is, I always call like New England fires truck work fires. You're checking for extension, you're overhauling, you're chasing it, you're doing a lot of sealing, pulling sealings and everything else. Unlike, kind of today with sheetrock and everything else, where it's, once you get into the void space, there is no void space, kind of thing. You're not dealing with that as much. And, of course, and I say this jokingly, like, New England invented firefighting, right? So there's, like, you can't tell anybody from up here anything. So
right.
You're the last to change, almost always. Which in some ways I think is good because we kind of held on to our, like, hey, we're going, like, kind of like I talked about down there. Like, we go in, we put fires out, that's what we do. There's no deviation from that. But there's also a lot of resistance to some things that make sense to change that we don't, it's not unusual to go to a building and, the first thing you hear is glass breaking, even though they don't have water in the street yet, because that's what we've always done,
Yeah, right.
It's kind of, it's the pluses and minuses, and I think it's the same all over. Like, people hang on to things that they've always done because they've always done them, and it doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It doesn't necessarily make it right. It just is what it is, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's always going to be cultural and regional differences, and it may not work for us, but it doesn't mean it's wrong at all.
Yeah, I mean, the quote, and it's Shoot from Cincinnati or Cleveland, wherever he's from. He says all firefighting is local, and that's like true, because what works for you may work awesome for you, but may not fit into my scheme, and then you got the whole cultural differences of, even if it did work for us, you have to be able to convince, like in my case, 39 other people that it works.
Right.
So I could, have a great conversation with you, get buy-in from me. I'm like, hey, I'm going to change this. And now I got to come back and be like the salesman and sell it here. And guys are like, why would we want to do that? That's dumb. We've never, that doesn't make any sense. And,
we've been just fine. We've been fine up until this point.
It's funny, it's also like teaching. It's like the whole 100 miles in a briefcase, right?
Yeah.
You could come and say the exact same thing I'm saying, and they'd be like, wow, that makes perfect sense. Hey, we ought to do this. That's how we ended up going with a modified Minuteman and smoothbore.
Oh, interesting.
Aaron Fields came out here. Now, I was on board. I had a grant to buy them all. I wanted to bring nozzle forward here. We brought it to the county, and I sent 8 guys. I had 8 people put in for it. I was deputy at the time. I'm like, I sent 8 guys. After day 1, all 8 guys were pulling me aside. I was, just sitting in the lecture part of the class, pulling me aside, going, "Hey, can we do this? Can we get this?" I'm like, "You guys just became the implementation committee, buddy. You go sell it." And they're on board. We changed the hose loads. We figured out how to make it work. 100%. I could have pitched it all day long. It never would have happened.
Yeah.
I got 8 guys to buy into it, and it went like, we're still doing it to this day. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, you created the buy-in and the ownership at the lowest levels, right?
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I had the best salesman in the world to do it, right? I had Aaron Fields to do it, not Dave LeBlanc trying to do it.
Right.
Versus, how can you not? He's so charismatic and so forceful in his messaging. How can you not buy into what he's selling?
He's convincing, right? 100%.
He's got a well thought out, well labeled program that makes his points, and it's hard to be convinced other ways, other than apparently he puts out too many fires in parking lots, so it's unrealistic. But
yeah, right. Now, you kind of tossed up another question I had with the history aspect. So, hearing some of your speeches and training, and then also going back to some of your writing, I can tell you're like definitely a student of history, and then pulling from historic fire texts and thoughts and training from leaders from the 1800s even.
Right.
I mean, there are times when you can say the more things change, the more they stay the same with firefighting. There's certainly an aspect to that. And then obviously we need to get with the times and technology. You had a couple in your presentation just recently. What is it that you're seeing or feeling that's allowing like the fire service to hang on to the good piece of history? And what are the things that we're like, I don't know if I wanted to go as far as saying we need to shed, but like there's still a ton of value in the things that we're reading from generations ago.
Because I think what it boils down to is, and Eric Pettaway, he's a district chief in Boston, and he was like, I think he was on Twitter as like Flathead Jake or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He used to always just put out really good topics, and Boston's about as old school and parochial as it gets when it comes to firefighting. Like they're not going to change in a good way. Like they hold on to what works for them.
Yeah.
And they do. They brought in the whole NIST studies and transitional attack and everything else, and they're still doing the same thing because it works. And his definition of traditions, he's like, things became traditions because they worked, and that's why we hold on to them. And there's some dumb traditions. Like I went to fire officer class with a kid from Portland, Maine, and this was in like 2004, 2005. And he was a junior man on his ladder truck, and at 11 o'clock every night he had to go down and wash the wheels in the ladder truck, because when they had horses, the junior man had to go down and wash the horse manure off the wheels at 11 o'clock every night before everybody bunked in. They haven't had a horse in 100 years, 200 years, and he's still washing the wheels in the truck. All right, so that's a dumb idea. Like, that's dumb. Even in the same of holding on to your heritage and everything else, that's still dumb. Like, that's not a good tradition.
Right.
But I think when you look at, you try and hold on to what works, and I think that's what ended up happening when you look at the whole fire tech studies and the whole thing. Like, when people beyond NIST really started looking into us, and all of a sudden they're quoting, and I'm going to forget his name, but the guy from England that wrote the book and was talking about air track. Mm-hmm. And everybody's like, yeah, guess what? Flow path, air track, they're like the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. And people started to realize that none of this is really new. And I think that's what the fire service always does, right? The pendulum swings.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, everybody realizes that we're too far this way, so it comes back to center, and then maybe it swings a little bit too far this way. And we always just kind of, it's perpetually moving. What concerned me so much about the NIST studies and the UL studies and all that stuff was that we were on the verge of like totally reshaping a generation of firefighting on, I won't say bad information, but not complete information.
Correct.
And that was why I think you saw such a violent reaction to it. And you think about it, like a lot of really qualified people, a lot of people that have pushed down a lot of hallways were basically told, hey, listen, your experience doesn't matter to us because this is science and we've proven with science that you're wrong, only to find out that they were right and that, you know, the experience factor actually mattered more than the scientific factor. And just because they couldn't recreate it in the lab, you know, Sam Hill talked about this the other night.
Yeah.
He goes, the whole pushing fire thing, or actually it wasn't Sam, it was Mac. So Mac was telling me that he had Kerber on, was there, and they were backstage and they were talking to Jemmy, Danny Stratton, and Brian Emenacker from Camden.
Okay.
And Kerber was like, yeah, you know, you guys, you know, you got to realize, you know, you can't push fire. And the three of them, and like Mac, like looked at Kerber and he looked at the three of them, and he's like, well, we got to get going, guys. And he, you know, kind of, like, Steve, you know, you got to be careful about your messaging because you're trying to convince people who have actually seen what you're saying can't happen, that it can't happen. And he goes, and the difference is just because you can't recreate it in the lab doesn't mean it's not true. He goes, I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've seen us use hose streams and move fire from one space to the next space.
Right.
So I think I don't fault Kerber's intentions at all or anything else. I think he's done a lot of good for the fire service. If like I said in my in the class the other day, if I was going to hold anything against them, it would be that in their rush to produce information because they had to be able to be eligible for the next grant.
Yeah, right.
They weren't necessarily careful in how the information got released, and a lot of people after the fact bastardized and manipulated the messaging so that you end up with the slicers and all that other stuff that really ended up not being accurate or being at least controversial. And it wasn't because they hadn't done all the work.
Exactly.
Work in progress.
Yeah. I think you did a really great job explaining that too, where you got slicers and Recio. And I remember when I first started taking test promotion, like that was the acronym that would get hammered into you. Like, if you want to do well on the fireground and for promotion, you will follow this acronym. This is how you will prioritize and execute. And that became the mainstay for like initial strategy, driving the tactics on these fires. And going back to what you said, there's research and science has done like a tremendous amount of good, right? Like even outside the fire service. But the interesting thing about the fire service is that there are so many variables that cannot be accounted for. There's no way to control the variables. And so now we're trying to take a very clean piece of science and bring it into a very dirty, unruly, gray world that we operate in.
And, you know, I think you talk about, Timmy Collette talks about it, you talk about it, you're a living example of it. You know, the one variable, the biggest variable that we can't account for is our people.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you talk, you know, going back to Nate's fire and you talking about Nate's fire, you ended up in the position you were in because they knew you were the right guy to get the job done, or your crew was the right job to get
great crew.
It wasn't necessarily because you were the next up for that tasking.
Right.
Right. So there are times, I think, you know, everybody's done it where you're on the fireground. You've done it as a company officer where you've looked at your three guys and gone, yeah, this isn't his. I know he should be the guy doing it, but this isn't. I need that guy to do this time.
Yeah.
You know, and we've done it where I've had three companies standing in front of me, and I look to the captain that's laying on the ground, spent, and I'm like, hey, I need you to go cut another hole in the roof. Why? Because nobody else here is going to get it done. Like, I need you to get that done. And that's the biggest variable, right? The people are the biggest variable. The level of training, the level of experience, the level of comfort on the fireground, it's the biggest variable. And no matter how well trained they are and how good your culture is with the organization, whatever, you're never going to completely eradicate that variable. And because we're not all the same.
Right. We're not created equal. The performance is not created equal. And I appreciate you saying that. I mentioned in the class the other day how some people really rally against that mentality, and they say, well, then that must mean that there's a cultural issue or a training issue, an organizational issue. That's just the bell curve of the human element, human dynamics, yeah. Right? So I really appreciate that guys like you and Tim Klett and others were saying, no, you have to account for the human side of things because performance is not equal on the fireground.
If we were, and this is where the military comparisons always fall short. If we were the Navy SEALs, then we could eliminate that human element or the human variable as much as you're ever going to be able to, right? They probably are the only organization or one of the few organizations that can separate the wheat from the chaff and, okay, all our studs and rock stars are over here and, thanks for applying for buds, but you didn't make it. Their program is designed to get people on the other side that they can then train and bring up to that operational tempo that they need and act as uniformly as they can make any two humans, react. But if you listen to Redmond there, I forget his first name.
I'm thinking Jason, but is that the military guy?
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
Redmond.
Yeah.
He got shot in the face.
Yes, Jason Redmond.
Yep. So, but you look at his story, right? So he got all the way through buds. He was an officer.
Yep.
And was completely ineffective because he was a douchebag.
Yeah.
He didn't, and basically took getting ostracized from the community that he fought so hard to join for him to turn his shit around, figure it out, and kind of correct himself. Because he violated probably the biggest principle they have, which is trust.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched Simon Sinek's thing when he talks about the low performers and the high performers, and he's like, yeah, these guys are nightmares. We don't want these guys, and we'd rather have a guy that's a little bit of a low performer but way more dependable than a guy that's a higher performer that's undependable. That whole trust thing is their biggest piece, and that's what he broke. So yeah, the human element is the biggest variable, and that, I think you would agree with me on this. Sometimes that changes on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that, on a Monday, I'm not as good as I am on a Tuesday or whatever. I'm tired. I'm whatever. That my level of performance is different on any given day. So, you can't account for that at all.
Yeah.
I could tap Josh and say, Josh, I need you to get this done, and know you're the guy to get it done. But you got a cold or you got whatever, you're not feeling it, or your crews, you guys are having a weird dynamic where you came in and somebody pissed somebody off and you guys aren't gelling that day.
Yep. And
you're not as effective as you would be on any other day.
Sure. Yeah. That's a real thing. Yeah, we talked about that as well. I'm a big fan of being, I think it's overused a little bit. The jack of all trades, generalists typically do really well in the fire service. The specialists are necessary and they're needed. And that's one of those situations where you might get caught a little off guard, where you have the generalist that can operate in just about any fire ground, any problem you can throw at them, which I appreciate. But then every so often you do need that specialist, whether it's a special operations response, the hazmat and the trench or the confined space, that would be an example for me where all right, I'm going to handle logistics or whatever. You guys tell me what you need and how I can best support you, because this is too in the weeds for me.
I go as a one of my jobs is in our mutual aid system is I'm one of the control chiefs for the tech rescue team. I can tell you what I know about tech rescue on half a sheet of paper. It's not my wheelhouse at all. But that's dive ops, that's large area search, and then it's collapse, all that other stuff, right? But that's not my job. I go to basically to be a chief level interface with the incident commander for the tech team. When I do that, I have a tech guy who's way smarter than I'll ever be standing within punching distance of me, so he can tell me what he needs, and then I can tell him. I can tell the incident commander how, that's because they don't want to necessarily, a lot of the guys are firefighters, not officers, whatever. They're not going to interface as well with the chiefs. They don't speak chief.
Right.
But that's my whole role for doing that. But that's not it's not my wheelhouse. It's really, I was horrible with tech rescue. I can't tie a knot to save my life. I'm pretty good. The large area search thing, I'm pretty good at coordinating those and everything else and running those ops. But that's take a mental level genius to figure that out. It's coordinating resources and making sure you go cover the area you cover, and use a couple of good software programs for it that makes it really easy. But yeah, so 100%. And I think that's like, okay, a good leader is knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your people. So knowing when you look out over that crowd of faces going, I don't want that guy over there. You know, this isn't his job. I need somebody else.
Yeah.
And being able to do that and then kind of work through that whole problem, you know.
And you have that awareness too. Like, you have that awareness of yourself and your capabilities and limitations, and you're grabbing onto the right people. Like, all right, you're next to me now for the remainder of this incident to keep me straight, and I'll get you what you need. And that takes a ton of awareness.
You know, and even when, like, I go back to when I was a captain, like, I had a firefighter that literally could not climb a ladder without shaking so violently that, like, it was hazardous.
Yeah.
Hazardous to her health, it was hazardous to my health. And I finally said to her, I'm like, listen, if we go somewhere and we have to go to the roof, I'm like, you're staying on the ground. I'm like, I'm better off going to the roof by myself and doing what needs to be done than me trying, because I can't babysit both of us. The roof is hazardous enough as it is. I need to focus on what I'm doing, and I can't rely on you because it's just not your comfort level. That's fine.
Yeah.
I know that. You know that. We'll just be honest with each other here, and we'll go from there. And that, you know, that worked out fine for us. And fortunately for me, she didn't take offense to that, because that's where you get the other problems. The people that aren't willing to really take that look in the mirror and go, yeah, okay, he's right.
Yeah.
Where they want to, because they're humiliated, or their feelings are hurt, or they feel inadequate because you just basically called them out and said that they can't do something well. So then instead of trying to fix that or change that, they protest against you labeling them for that way, and then that's a different problem. But
for sure, I totally agree. When you have a trusted enough team where you can remove that ego, then there's actually more respect bound up in that conversation. I mean, that's a super hard conversation to have, but it's bound with like trust and respect there. We're like, hey, listen, this is not your wheelhouse. I got you. There might be something that comes up where the roles are going to be reversed here, and there's no shade. Like, I'm not trying to keep you, from playing or being a starter.
Behind the back, oh, this person can't do that. It's not like I'm going. I'm just saying this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
If the two of us are there and the ladder's you're going to help me get the ladders up, and you're going to get whatever I need on the roof, and you're going to bring it to me, and I'm going to go cut the hole.
Right.
And I'm going to get down, and that's going to be the way it is. And I'm good with that. You need to be good with that, because you coming up on the roof is more of a hazard to both of us.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
I mean, she was also probably one of the biggest nightmare employees I ever had to work with. But that conversation.
That's aside from it, right. Going more towards the leadership side of that, so having those real conversations. This is something in the private industry, but then also within the fire service. I'm seeing more of, like, even when my wife and I talk about struggles she's having with her organization, there is what I'll call, like, there's tons of different styles of leadership. We'll just say the most genuine style of leadership is just when you can show up as your authentic self. There's this other side right now that's like, it's performative. It is, they read the book, they went to some training, they say and do all the right things, but it's not genuine. And you can read right through it. Typically, when you first meet these leaders, they're like, okay, they're saying and doing all the right things. I like it. I appreciate it. But then when you start to stretch that over here, like, oh, no. They don't necessarily believe in what it is they're doing. They just know that it's the right thing because they read it in a book somewhere. And sometimes it's really easy to pick apart and identify. Sometimes it takes a year or more. It takes a long time to identify, like, oh no, everything that this person is doing is just performative. For you in your position, because you're dealing with not only the fire side, but also the political side, being, the chief of your department, how are you identifying and then dealing with those personalities?
So the interesting thing, so I would tell you, like, I'd like to think that I have a pretty good self-awareness.
Yeah. And
I cringe when, like, I was talking to, I work for a board of selectmen, so there's 5 of them. I'm a town administrator, but I'm on the way the town is. I'm essentially a peer to him. I'm not a subordinate to him.
Okay.
We're on the same level. Now, I don't go around him for anything. I deal with him with everything, but I answer directly to the board. And I had one of the members of the board make the comment that, like, well, I know everything's run with the fire department because, the chief, if he's got a problem, he's going to tell everybody like it is. And I'm like, I kind of had to chuckle because I'm like, that's not really who I am. If I'm really honest with myself, the one thing that I struggle with the most is direct confrontation with people.
Mm-hmm.
I am wicked emotionally driven, more so than I should be. I don't have the ability, and this is a 55-year-old man talking, I don't have the ability, I've never learned the ability to handle the emotional piece when it's not emotional. Like, so when it's not personal, but if I still get emotional about it.
Yeah.
And that makes it really hard to, that one-on-one confrontation with people. Some people I can do it with fine. It really just depends on the dynamic of the relationship that I have. So with what you're saying is, I think that I worked for a guy that used to make sure that everybody got their lunch at noontime, that everybody, at 4 o'clock we were done. Like, he made sure all those things happened, but it wasn't because he believed those things should happen. It was because that's what he was told.
It was the check boxes to be a good leader.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So but he's a guy who had no problem with direct confrontation. Like, he would, but also would never listen to anything you had to say. So he'd call you out or wouldn't listen to you. So I think that I actually started writing an article about this because if you're on social media like I am, every single day we're bombarded with like what the perfect leader is, like all these traits that we're supposed to have as a perfect leader. And I struggle with, like, nobody has all those traits. And
No.
I don't even know if anybody can learn all those traits. And certainly if you can, I don't know that you can be good at all those traits. So, like, all the things that we're supposed to have to be a good leader, I think the biggest thing that a leader can recognize is the things that he doesn't do well.
Yeah.
Right? And then try and correct for that. Or hopefully you have a number two that, okay, I'm not a strong people person, so my number two, you're the people guy. Like, I need you to be the people guy. I think that the days of, the leader is the autocratic, son of a bitch that, hard driving, whatever, and then the XO is the one that implements. I think that dynamic has changed, and you have to recognize your strengths and weaknesses and balance that with your number two strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully you find out what your roles are and what works and what doesn't work, and you kind of go through it. I'm never going to be the hard-ass guy. That's not who I am. I'm not afraid to say exactly how I feel. My father was an electrical engineer, and he was the most direct human that I ever met. He was direct without necessarily caring whether it hurt or not, but his intention was never to hurt. His intention was just to tell you how he felt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So he didn't, my mother, on the other hand, was the other way. Like, my mother would avoid saying anything at all because she wanted to avoid the conflict and whatever. So I'm probably a pretty equal split of my parents. And depending on the situation, I'm probably some days more like my mother, some days more like my father.
Sure.
They say, like, on the fireground, like, when I'm doing stuff, I'm more like my father. 100%. Like, I'm not interested in the conversation. I'm going to say what I got to say. If it hurts your feelings, sorry, it wasn't my intent, and be less apologetic for it. Whereas in the firehouse, I'm probably way more like my mother, where I would evoke a phrase that my mother always says is, when you say something like that, it makes me feel this way. Like, I'm a little bit more soft skills there, because I think that there's room for those in the firehouse.
Yeah. I think it's more necessary.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So, but yeah, I definitely going way back, because we went way off the reservation. I think there are a lot more people today that are doing things because they think that's what they should be doing, or they read that's what they should be doing, or that's what the book told them they should be doing.
Yeah.
But don't necessarily buy into it. And I also think that there's probably a little bit of that, is that they don't buy into it because I don't know that it works, right? So I think that some of the stuff we're being told to do doesn't necessarily work. Like,
Oh, give me an example.
again, I'll have to think about like this. I don't know, like, so it's either it doesn't work or it's poorly explained. Like, so,
Yeah.
like the big buzzword now is like servant leadership, right?
Yeah.
Where,
Or the upside down triangle or whatever.
yeah, we're supposed to serve our people and everything else. And I think that gets blurred sometimes as to what people, I'll do anything for my people. I'll do anything, and I will stand up and take the hits for my people. But I will also hold my people accountable when they need to be. And they're not going to like being held accountable. Nobody likes being held accountable. True professionals kind of accept it.
Yeah.
Nobody likes it. It hurts. It's uncomfortable. But there were people who'd be like, well, you're not being a good leader because you're holding people accountable. No, I'm being a good leader because I am. Right? Sometimes the people we need to protect ourselves is from ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
We need to be told. It's like, I hate the comparison. I use it too often. It's like the parents and the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you don't hold everybody accountable, the other children are watching. If you don't hold anybody accountable, the other children are watching. Like, everybody's always watching and letting you see what you let people get away with. And we're as good as the worst behavior that we tolerate. And I'll tell you that I tolerate sometimes some really bad behavior because sometimes it's just not, I don't want to say it's not worth fixing, but sometimes you just know you're not going to fix it.
Yeah.
So you can spend a lot of time and energy trying to correct that behavior, or you can just kind of accept the fact that, and this is why I say, like, the leadership things don't always work. Yeah, we should be treating everybody the same. We should be holding everybody accountable. Sometimes you can't. I don't think you can. Like, I could get into a daily conflict with some people to try and hold them accountable, and I think ultimately would end up wasting more time and energy than it's worth when you know how they're perceived within the rest of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the way you dug in on that a little further. You can't. It's not a one size fits all approach, right? Like, I've certainly been doing the officer thing long enough to know that if I were to try to do the behavior modification thing for a problem employee using the exact same format I've used through all my employees, like, I wouldn't get anywhere, right? You have to dig into how that person's going to respond with their experiences, with their emotions, and it is wildly different. So if you're thinking you're going to take a page out of a book and say, hey, you can have a general rubric. I'm fine with that. A general, workflow matrix in your head, but there is no such thing as a one size fits all. I mean, we're humans, right? We're messy. Like, there's no way that's gonna fly throughout an entire organization.
No, and it doesn't. And I think that that's where people struggle, right? Is because we're kind of raised that, like, we're going to treat, and we're not. Again, I think a lot of our stuff goes back to the military, and we're not a military organization.
Yeah.
We're paramilitary, but at the end of the day, like, a good friend of mine, he's on the fire department, and he was in the Army. So he's on the fire department, he's in the Army, and he used to always say, it's hard to be the military leader in the firehouse when the next day, the guy that you're being the military leader with, you're working for building decks.
Yeah.
The relationship is different.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't. So it just, I think it takes balance. I think it takes, I think you've got to figure out what works for you. To your thing about the people that read the book and, are they authentic versus just reading the book? If I try to behave in a way that isn't my core of who I am, even though it may be the correct leadership way to handle a certain circumstance or whatever, if it's not who I am in my core, I'm not going to be authentic with it.
Right.
If I were to march out on the apparatus floor right now and try and be like Patton and freaking start barking at people and telling, that may be the right method for that particular moment, but it's not who I am. So people would recognize right away that that's not who I am, because that's not who I operate like, and right away, I would lose. It wouldn't be believable, and I would lose everybody.
Sure. People are going to know when you believe in something and then you're acting on it. If you're acting on something you truly don't believe in it, they're clearly identifiable, I think, for most people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're getting at the heart of.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so I think that's, you have to find the leadership style that works for you. And I think that there isn't, to your point, you said earlier, there isn't a one size fits all. There's a framework and there are skills that, there are things you have to do. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's things you have to do as a leader. You have to run your organization. You have to be accountable to your superiors. You have to make sure that your organization is doing the things it's supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of times that I would have told you 10 years ago, I'd never say this. We have to pick your fights. And some fights aren't worth it.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot of time and energy fighting every single battle and getting nothing done versus putting your time and energy into the fights that are worth winning.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have a greater impact. You may affect one person, but that impact on one person is going to have ripple effects on the rest of the organization versus going down the rabbit hole of one person. People that, it's like they're having a battle of wits with an unarmed person. They drag you down to your level and beat you with their experience, right? I mean, that's what happens, right? When you fall to that level, they're going to kick the crap out of you and still come out looking, even though you're 100% right and 50% of the organization or 75% would agree with you, that other person is going to turn that whole equation around, and you're going to come out looking like, I had a captain who used to say to me all the time, he's like, when somebody comes in the office, I'm never going to lose. And I used to it was a little bit of like an arrogance thing, but it was what I finally understood over time was like, I'm never going to engage in a coaching, counseling, corrective conversation with somebody that I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to come out, that where I want to end is where I start, or where I start with where I want to end up is where we're going to end up. If there's any chance of me being wrong with the information I have, or there being a perspective that I haven't considered, or whatever, I'm not going to engage in that because I'll lose.
Yeah.
And when I lose, the impact is much bigger.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not. I think at first glance people might think that's an arrogant thing, but I think it's actually quite the opposite. There's
not about a win-lose. It's about what the impact will be.
The impact and preparedness. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. If you come out and it's obviously you weren't prepared, then you're going to look bad, and you've lost some credibility within your organization. You've lost some face within your organization because you went after somebody in air quotes. I'm not saying you're going after them, but you challenge somebody on their behavior, and they prove you wrong.
Right. Yeah, like you said, you sunk to their level. just got completely trashed. Not quite a similar vein, but certainly within like individual leadership here. I want to switch gears a little bit and dig into some of the things that you mentioned at the Training Days conference. And your one post has gained a lot of traction, right? And I know there's been some dialogue about the Close Before You Doze campaign.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm setting you up here, but I think you said it really, I think you used 3 words: biased action, right? If we are going to sit there and tell people to close their doors because we will come in and save them, and that is the expectation the community has on us. Now, yes, we can get in the weeds. There's a ton of nuance just with that.
Right.
But what you're getting, correct me if I'm wrong, the spirit of what you're getting at is biased action. Like, do what it is that the community expects of us. And damn hesitancy, damn risk avoidance, and do your job.
Yes. So 100%, where it got a little controversial, and actually had a good conversation with the one person that called me out the most, because there's, my quote as it was put up said, that close your door, stay put, and we will come in and save you. And that's not what Close Before You Doze teaches. It teaches get out if you can get out, but close your door because it'll buy you time. And then if you can't get out, then we're going to come in and save you. Right?
Yeah.
So that's, and what I said wasn't any different than kind of what was said in the video. That clip that I had, that one sentence that I put up was an excerpt of a bigger thought, which was working smoke detectors, close your door, buy yourself the time, all those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not
snapshot.
If you can get out of the building, get out of the building. That wasn't what I was trying to say. But what I was saying, and yes, you hit the nail on the head, is we as a fire service should expect that, because we're telling these people, our fire prevention divisions are telling these people, our parent organizations are telling these people that If you close your door, you will build yourself an area of refuge where you will be safe if you can't get out or until you can get out. That we need to expect as a fire service that when we're pulling up on these things, that those spaces are going to exist. And our job is, to your point, to have a bias to action, to go in with incomplete information, which is what the bias to action is all about, and execute a search in those spaces to see if they're occupied, because that's what we told people we'll do. That's, to me, that's kind of the quid pro quo with that, right? We're telling people that they should close the door because it makes a savable space, then we have to be willing to search that savable space.
Yeah.
Or searchable space, right? So that's kind of the message I was trying to deliver, and obviously this is a lot more of a conversation than I had there, and certainly that got a lot of shares and a lot of traction.
Mm-hmm.
Funny because Bill Carey shared, I don't know if you saw, he shared an article that Sean Donovan and I wrote a couple of years ago called The Rescue Mindset, like a lot more than a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I had that almost exact same quote in that article. There's a problem with me being old, as I've said shit before, I just don't remember it. But the bias to action is not necessarily a new thing, but something I kind of read a little bit more about, and wasn't talking about that back then. But to me, that's the contract we're making. It's a little bit like the Tot Finder stickers. Brian Brush brought that up way back when. People used to come to the firehouse and we'd give them the sticker and say, put this on little Johnny's window, because when we see that sticker, we're going to go search for little Johnny.
Yeah.
And the flawed part of that was that people left them on the windows, and little Johnny was 40 years old, and we were still looking for him in that room, and he hasn't lived there for 20 years. But
right.
But it's the same. It's the unspoken contract that we have with the public, that if you do this, if you behave in this manner, we're going to behave in this manner. Mm-hmm. If you close your kids' doors at night so that they're safe, and the house catches on fire, if they can't get out, we're going to come get them out.
Yeah.
And if we're not making that, then that's a problem.
Yes.
And maybe I'm reading too much into the unspoken contract part of it, but to me, that's how I read it. Like, we're telling you, first of all, we're telling everybody, but every day we come to work as a fire department, that if your house catches on fire, we're going to come put it out. And if you're inside that house, we're going to rescue you. To me, that's the way, I think, the oath that we swear, right? That's somewhere in there. Job description, maybe, life and property. Like, keep it simple. Like,
right.
That's what we're here for, life and property. So that is not an unspoken promise that we've made. It's a spoken promise that we made. We said, this is what we're here for. So then these other things just kind of piggyback on top of that. If you behave this way, you're going to give us more time to save your life. If you behave this way, we're going to search that space to save your life. Like, we're building off of that original baseline promise of life and property. And I think that's where we lose sight of it sometime, and that was kind of the message I was trying to get, that we, there's risk involved with there's risk involved with everything that we do.
Yes.
The fire service, coming to work in the morning, being a bus driver, being a carpenter, there's risk associated with absolutely everything that you do in any day in life. Our risk may be more in some cases. I think that many in the fire service would be surprised when you look at the world's most riskiest professions, that we're nowhere near as high as we think we are.
Yeah.
In risk and actual injury and death from that risk.
Yeah, and Bill Carey's done a phenomenal job with you alongside of him, outlining what those actually look like.
That's him. That's nothing to do with me. I'm, like I said, if you had to describe Bill Carey and my relationship, he's the sports announcer that's calling the game, and I'm the color commentator that's talking about the dumb things that the players do.
The random stats and the hype man.
Totally. Like, I just keep it interesting. He's the one that totally has the
data.
He's done a really good job and dive into the data and looked at it, and that's how flawed we are. So this is where I'll go back to a little bit of the research. The research was built on the premise of us killing 100 firefighters a year fighting fires.
Mm-hmm.
Right out of the gate, we know that that's not an accurate number.
Correct.
So the data that we're building, the thing that we're trying to fix is nowhere near as big a problem as, and I'm still not knocking the research. I think the research needed to happen.
Yes.
But I think we were trying to solve a problem that wasn't as big of a problem as we thought it was.
Right.
or as we were led to believe it was. And that's no disrespect. I'm always cautious when I talk about this, and Bill and I had a long conversation before September about not wanting to seem callous toward any line of duty death, towards anybody's loss. And I mean anybody's loss. Anybody that's done this job for any number of years, whether whether they pass away from, on the fireground, in the firehouse, whatever, I totally respect the commitment that they made and the sacrifice that they've given and the impact that has on their family. Never would I try and minimize that at all. But I think we as a fire service need to be honest about what we're actually trying to fix.
Yeah.
Because if we're trying to prevent 100 deaths a year by transitional attack, we're not going to do it. Because that's not what's killing 100 firefighters a year. And I think that to some level, like if you think about if you use a military comparison, like if a general was planning a mission with zero casualties in mind, he would never execute that mission.
Never.
Because they know that there's a likelihood that somebody's going to be killed or wounded in the performance of that mission. They're going after bad guys. They're going to shoot back at them. Now, we don't know that, but we know that it's a possibility, right? So it's a possibility that somebody could be killed doing what we do. So we prepare our people. That's where the focus needs to be, right? Prepare everybody to the best of our ability to make sure they have all the tools at their disposal and have the best advantage so that if something goes sideways, they're prepared for it. And hopefully the outcome is a good outcome, not a bad outcome.
For sure. Yeah, I think sometimes we have cast too wide of a net. Like, metrics are good. They drive research and purpose and awareness. I'm all about data and metrics. But at a first glance, quick glance, with that wide stroke of a paintbrush, we have taken that as 100 deaths, and it's a very dangerous job, which it can be. But as you guys have put together, like, it's single digits on average. Correct me if I'm wrong, about people actually dying inside of fires, like on hose lines or searching. And
even that's skewed because of the metrics that they use to measure line of duty deaths.
Right.
So like when the data that I put up from 2019 in my program, there were 5 deaths on the hose line. One of them was at a wildfire.
Yes.
So even that is like nothing against those guys. Those guys have their shit together totally.
Oh yeah.
Probably more than the rest of the American Fire Service does when it comes to actually analyzing what happened and figuring it out and preventing, their Forest Service is light years ahead of a lot of organizations. But how can I prevent, how as a fire chief can I prepare my organization to prevent a line of duty death that occurred on a hose line at a wildfire when wildfires are not something that we deal with on a regular basis? Like, right. So for that to be included in that data set, no disrespect to that person, should be included. It was a line of duty death, but it's not one that we're going to be able to mitigate by, staying outside the building and not going in, or waiting until it's safe to go in, or any of those other things.
Entirely different parameters.
Yeah, 100%. Now, if I was fighting a forest fire, then that becomes statistically relevant. And I think that part of the problem is, I actually got schooled by a fellow fire chief the other day about this. So, UL, FRSI came out with some data about PFAS and turnout gear the other day. It was a study that they did where basically they beat up gear and then see if that impacted the release of PFAS from the gear. And so I read this report, and one of the things that I pulled out of it was it basically said that they couldn't determine if the increased levels of PFAS they got were from the damage to the gear or the process they used to extract the PFAS from the gear.
Okay.
Well, that's statistically stupid. Right now you're telling me that your process may have actually created the increased PFAS level. So what good is that? So I kind of got wrapped around the axle about it, lost my mind, and this other fire chief, a good friend of mine, he said, that report was never meant for you to read. So he's like, yeah, sure, UL released it so that other scientific organizations would look at it and maybe study it, and who understand what that data set is, who understand all the nuance of that article, all the all the words in that article. They're like, you're just a dumb fire chief. He's like, that was never meant for you to read. He's like, and you're an idiot for getting all upset about it. And he was 100% right. He was 100% right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm tilting in windmills, reading a document that not that I didn't understand, but the implications, it wasn't meant for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant for me as a fire chief. It wasn't meant for the average line firefighter to read. It wasn't meant for the union to read or the I chiefs to read. It was meant for other scientific organizations to read, to then take that data, put it into their studies, and then try and figure out what was what. And I think that's part of the problem. When you said, you know, you're into the metrics and the data, is that a lot of times we don't understand what we're actually reading. And that's no disrespect to anybody, not saying we're smarter or dumber or anything else, but things aren't always written for us. But we'll read it and we'll be like, aha, I got it. And then, you know, and then we share it, and because we're, you know, social media makes everything the truth because it was on the internet.
Right.
We'll share something and we have no idea what we're actually sharing.
Yeah.
Or we're bastardizing the intent of that data because that's not what it was meant to, how it was meant to be used. So I think it's interesting, the whole dynamic there. And, you know, we've had access to more information now than we've ever had.
Yeah, than ever.
You know, and I'm not necessarily sure that's always a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate you saying that. So my wife works in scientific research, and there's actually a formal term for that, of small bite-sized chunks of research meant to advance the next bit of research. So not all research needs to be this like overwhelming, mind-blowing, game-changing thing. It's just a little piece of the puzzle. So hopefully the next iteration, the next group, or somebody else in the industry comes along and goes, oh, I can take that. I know, I'll take what I know and I'll make this better, or I'll change it up. And we'll start to pull apart these variables even more. There's actually a formal term for it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but she talks about that.
Yeah, so, and that's essentially what this other chief was telling me.
Yeah.
You know, that's a piece of a bigger picture, and you're only looking at that little piece. It's like, and you're losing your mind over that little piece because you think it's saying one thing. But I think part of my reaction to that is that other people are going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that we're going to start fighting things that aren't statistically relevant because people have made them relevant, even though that's not what the data is really saying.
Yeah. Just because you speak confidently on it doesn't mean you're necessarily correct.
Right. And right, because you're speaking confidently about something that was never intended to be used in the way that you're using it.
Yeah.
This isn't the end. This isn't the last study. It's one part of the beginning study. And it's not a final document. It's not the final truth. It's hey, we did this, and this needs to be looked at more because, you know, I think going with what you're saying, like, hey, we did this and came to this conclusion, but our methods or our process only allows us to go this far.
Yeah.
Well, now somebody else comes along and goes, hey, you know what? I can take that and advance it further and either debunk it and find out that you were wrong, or solidify it, and then we can go to the next level with it and say, yeah, that's really a problem that we need to look at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know you're a fire chief and you've carved out time for me, so I want to be respectful of that and wrap up a couple things here. You were talking about how you wrote articles a while back, and there was one in particular, kind of getting onto some of the close the door stuff, that reminded me. And it was in 2014 when you wrote the article, Women and Children First. And in it, you said, as soon as we cross the threshold, then they come first. And then you just spoke about that again here recently, where, we always talk about, who's more important? Is it us or is it them? It's this whole combination thing, right? Like, we are doing things on the engine bay floor training, in our classes, in our conferences, in the gym, whatever the case may be, because we're taking care of us and the team. So it's us first. And then as soon as we cross that threshold, then it does become them. And then we have to uphold that expectation.
And I think that's like, so if you look at like Dave Gallagher spoke at Fools Convention back in Texas, and he talked about everyone goes home.
Yeah.
When he spoke of it the first time, he spoke of it kind of the military's, in the parallel that he drew was the military's leave no man behind. Like, not everybody's going to come home alive, but we're not going to leave anyone behind.
Yeah.
I just rewatched on the way home from North Carolina. Rewatched We Were Soldiers, and Hal Moore's speech. He's like, I will leave no soldier behind.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee you're all going to survive, but I'll leave no soldier. So that's what Dave Geller was talking about. Well, that became what Everyone Goes Home is now, which is a twist of that message.
Yes.
I think that, I've been schooled a couple times, and I certainly have changed my opinion a little bit, but I think everybody understands that not everybody's going to come home. There's no zero risk. There's no way that we can guarantee everybody's going to survive on any given day. If we did, we might as well not go out the door at all. But I think that message, again, was bastardized by some, where we created this environment of us coming first, of putting ourselves, the firefighters, before the public in which we serve. And that's what that kind of, to me, what that means, we come first, and like you're talking about, like it said in the article, like I said at training days, is we come first when it comes to being healthy, to getting the rest we need, to sleeping, to working out, to training, to doing all the things to make us better firefighters. But we have to, like, once we cross the threshold, our primary focus has to be the citizens. And if it isn't, then we're not, in my mind, we're not upholding our oath.
Yeah.
That's what that means. And nowhere in any of that, because I've been accused of this, I've been accused of being a cowboy, I've been accused of all kinds of things. Nowhere in any of that is, rushing headlong into a fully involved building because somebody might be inside of it. But I'll tell you what it is like, it's doing your 360, and if you see a window or a space that isn't fully involved, maybe trying to get somebody into that space to do a dirty search before it's involved, because somebody might be in there.
Yeah.
And that the fire started somehow, and that's, sometimes it's because of accidents and whatever, and sometimes it's because people are in there. And we have a homeless problem in this town, just like the rest of America, so we're not any different. It's not as prolific as it is in some places, but we still have people that are living in tents and woods and are accessing vacant buildings and seeking shelter in there. So we have to have that mindset that anything's potentially occupied. And that's where knowing, I was rereading one of our strategy and tactics manuals, but knowing your first due, knowing what your buildings look like, so you have a plan for them, is so important. That, so that I know, hey, that building is like a total piece of shit. I know I can't go in there at all, because if it's not on fire, it's going to fall down on top of me. And we have some buildings like that. But knowing, hey, that house is pretty solid and robust. If we have to, we can get up to the second floor and we can check the bedrooms off a ladder real quick before a fire takes total possession of the place. And that's why that's so important. But again, to me it's that mindset of, and I talked about being vigilant. Like, we need to go out the door thinking that we're going to save somebody's life.
Yeah. And
that should be the mindset, not that, hey, I come first and, ooh, that looks a little too risky, or those are all equations, thoughts that we have. I don't, we all constantly do that, but I think our mindset needs to be, I'm going to go save a life.
Yes.
And if I can't, or there isn't one to save, then great. And if there is one to save and I can't, then that sucks.
Yeah.
And we have to live with that too. But for there to have been a potential life to have saved and us to have not done something because of we come first mentality, I could never live with that in my core, who I am. So I feel like we broke our oath at that point.
I know, I completely agree. And not only would that destroy the trust for the community, I think just for the department or that crew's own mindset of, I could have saved somebody, but I didn't. That's like planting a seed of poison, potentially. That will really mess with people.
Think about this, right? Here's another one, because we all know the kitchen table is the most honest and the most brutal place in the firehouse. What do you think C shift is going to say when D shift didn't make a grab that they know everything about, even though they were never at the fire?
Right.
But they're gonna rip, to your point of planting the seeds of poison. The seeds of self-doubt within your own guys, but also the seeds are dealt with in the rest of the apartment.
Yep.
You know, it kind of starts tearing you apart a little bit of, you guys didn't do everything that you could have done, and that person passed away because of it. You know, then that potentially, you know, now that creates some internal culture conflict that would be, yeah, the potential there is pretty ugly.
Yeah, no, that would absolutely wreak havoc. And kind of making this whole full circle thing with the research that's out there with UL and NIST, and the inability to control the variables that we're going to encounter in the real world. We just don't know, right? At the end of the day, we just don't know. So if there's a survivable space, let's do it. You know, just recently, I've heard of a fire where from the exterior, the bedroom window was like front to back, top to bottom, full of fire. It's venting out. But within that couple seconds, whoever the person was rescued. They were, I think, like in the doorway or in the hallway. And because the door was open, there was just that little pocket of fresh air coming in from the front door. They were in that little bit of survivable space and they were able to be saved. But from the outside, it looked like, nah, whoever's in that room's done. But again, that goes back to the variables that we just don't know. And there's research out there. And you were talking about strategy and tactics. You also said in that article, being in compliance does not mean being out of danger. So we still have all the rules. There's all the research out there that we can use to our benefit or have it be hurtful to us. And we have to decipher what is good and what is useful. We still have the job to do. We still have to have the job to do.
That in compliance thing comes from Mike Rowe's
safety third, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you know, totally, you know, what he talks about. And, you know, the best story that he ever tells is he was in a crab boat in the Bering Sea. This was before Deadliest Catch came about.
Okay.
And he's like, so he was on the boat, he's climbing the stack, he's chaining the stack down. The boat's like rolling 15 degrees each direction. You know, they're in 40-foot seas. And he comes up to the captain and he goes, Captain, he's like, haven't you ever heard of OSHA? And the captain looks at him and he goes, Ocean. He goes, my job is not to bring you back. My job is to catch crab and make you money, for, you know, while you're out here. He's like, that's my job. He goes, you want to be safe? That's on you. And that was what the captain of the crab boat said to Mike Rowe. And that was kind of where he got that whole, you know, he realized at that point that, like, if I want to be safe, then it's my responsibility to be safe. That having a list of rules that tells me how to be safe, or a sign on the wall that tells me how to be safe, that's not going to make me any safer. And that's where that in compliance doesn't equal out of danger.
Yeah.
He tells the best story ever, and this is a classic. He's on a 6-foot high scaffolding. He's wearing a full harness, and the safety officer comes over to him and says, hey, you got to put this tether on if you're going to go up on that scaffolding. And Mike goes, how long is that scaffold? How long is that tether? And he goes, 6 feet. And he looks down at the ground and he goes, but I'm only 6 feet off the ground. And the guy goes, safety first. So, you know, it's, you know, how many rules exist that really don't make you any safer?
Right.
But they, you know, but those rules exist.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was Ray McCormick talked about a long time ago, like 2 in, 2 out. If you had 4 guys in the fireground that were all dressed and ready to go, would you rather have 2 of them standing out in the front yard and 2 of them going in, or would you rather have all 4 of them go in so that you can execute whatever task you have to do better?
Yeah.
There's safety in numbers.
Yes.
And we've proven, like the Brett Tarver studies out of Phoenix after Brett passed away, after his fire was killed, proved that 1 guy is not going to get you out, or 2 guys aren't going to get you out anyway.
It's people in the interior.
Yeah, it took like 14 people to get 1 person out of the building.
Right.
And so we're giving, you would give us this. I'm like, now I've gone against transitional attack, 2 in, 2 out.
We're gonna burn you at the stake, man.
Yeah, but we have these rules that are in place. Do they really make sense? Yeah, 2 in, 2 out makes perfect space if you're in a confined space atmosphere in a facility, and you put 2 guys outside to watch the 2 guys inside.
Yeah.
You know, that makes sense. But does it make sense in the fireground when we could put all 4 potentially into the building? And I think that the argument with that is that just look at how the fire service is interpreted. Well, the chief can count as 1 out. The pump operator can count as 1 out. Like, we've come up with all these ways to try and
morph it,
because we know that it doesn't work. So I think, most people do what they do. They assume that the place is occupied. They go on a rescue profile. They ignore it and hope that everything goes right.
Yeah. Well, Salka even talked about this years ago at one of the training days. Was we're getting into the accountability talk. He was probably piggybacking off of McCormick, and we have accountability boards and we have the pat tags and we have the 2 out. He's like, your accountability is the red fire engine that's sitting in the front yard. Like, where your people are, what your staffing is. Most departments, I know there's on call and people responding with their cars, and that's a separate conversation. But the accountability is the fire engine out front with the hose line going through the door. And having those intelligent, aggressive, capable firefighters on the interior is what's going to make those problems go away. Right. And so here's where we get into the argument again of policy and compliance getting in the way of, problem resolution, for lack of better words. And I even mentioned that just this past week, where some of the research that's been done would say that the more safety measures that you put in place, the less safe you are going to be, because you just can't account for everything that's going to happen on the fireground, right? I don't mean to be redundant here, but the fire's indifferent to our capabilities. There is nothing, we can't politicize the fire going out in every situation. It's completely unreasonable.
Right, and I think what happens is we have safety policies. We have this whole book of safety policies, and we take people look at that, and they, to your point, they think that this is what's gonna save my life, instead of realizing that what's gonna save their life most likely is them, and if it isn't them, it's gonna be their partner.
Yep.
And that's where their safety lies. Their safety lies in their abilities, their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and their partner's knowledge, skills, and abilities. And yeah, we put our lives in another guy's hands, and we hope that he's up for the task, like they're putting their lives in our hands and hope that we're up for the task. And no amount of thou shalt not wear your chin strap until after you put your regular, that's not gonna keep you safe. But we confuse that, right? And that's what Mike Rose ultimately talking about in that. It's, great, you got to have a whole bunch of rules that say this is how we're going to be safe, but it doesn't make you any safer.
Right.
It really doesn't make any safer.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah, no. Good talk, brother.
Yeah, dude. It's funny. Every time I feel like every time we talk and get together, man, I just get more fired up and more jazzed up for where this goes. My cup gets filled up talking to you, man. And this is, like I said, I know you're still at work. You carved out time for me, which I appreciate. When we were going through that generation of calling the community customers, it drove me nuts, and I couldn't always articulate why, but you said it in that article in 2014, Women and Children First. And then it was from there that, as things would get posted, I don't even remember where they would have gotten posted, but wherever that was, I remember not knowing who, Chief LeBlanc was from, Massachusetts, but it was from then, like, you were a mentor of mine before I even knew you. And I just say that to say it's amazing now, a decade later, I get to rub elbows with you. We're going to conferences. Some of the best conversations I've had to keep faith in that we're doing the right thing for the fire service is over beers in a hotel lobby with other like-minded men and women. I really could not ask for more. You fill my cup. And like I said, you've been a mentor of mine before I've even known you for over a decade now. And I cannot thank you enough. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing for the fire service and your writing. And, man, I so appreciate you making time for me.
So I'll tell you 100%. First of all, I appreciate being asked, and all of what you just said is super humbling, because when I look at, like, when I take that step back, and I think, as I said, I hope that I have a pretty good self-awareness. I'm a little small town dude that's on a small fire department in Massachusetts, and I've always struggled with the fact that I had a voice that resonated with anybody, because most of what I'm talking about is just the way I was raised in the fire service.
Yeah.
I talked a little bit about it the other day, which was, I had no risk assessment when I started in this job. My risk assessment was not getting my ass kicked for not doing my job, not letting anybody down and not wanting to let anybody down. And that has carried with me through my career. Like that's what I hold on to is I don't ever want to let anybody down, whether it's the citizens, whether it's my selectman, whether it's my chief, whether it's my, when I was a firefighter, my lieutenant, whatever. I don't ever want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy that they point to and say, this is why this all went sideways.
Yeah.
And that's what's driven me. Bill Carey, God bless his soul, he's a great dude, and he gave me a place to write. Probably, I would argue, when I didn't even probably deserve to have I didn't even know what I was writing at that point, but I had some thoughts, put them on paper, and he gave me a home, and he still to this day gives me a home. And
yeah,
he and I think a lot alike. I say it all the time. He's way smarter than I'll ever be. So anytime I sound smart, it's because of Bill. It's not because of me.
He's great. He's great.
So, but as I said to you in September, and I mean this, all of that is truly humbling, coming from somebody that stood up on that training day stage, which is an imposing place to stand. I know Mac says it's the friendliest room in the world, but you stood up there, and for you to tell Nate's story the way you did, and my peripheral connection to Nate through the guys that I taught with, and tell that story the way you told it, and the lessons that you brought out, and the honest reflection you had of what everybody did that night, that to me speaks volumes of who you are as a person and who you are as a firefighter and a fire officer. So that, you, as much as a mentor that you say I am to you, you are a mentor to me for being able to stand there and give that lecture, and to be that self-effacing and honest about everything that went on with that. So my hat's off to you, brother. The pleasure is all mine for being here, and I could talk to you for another 3 hours, and
easy.
I'm sure solve another 15 world problems.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're just taking it all by storm. Thank you. That means everything. And like I said, it's a massive honor. And always leave our conversations with a full heart. So I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
And beers and lobbies are the best way to go to any fire conference. The best nights I've ever had have been hotel beers.
Yeah, hell yeah. I love it. Well, listen, thank you so much. I know you're probably closing out your work day, and I got kids getting off the bus here soon, so we'll close up, but I know we're going to catch up soon. I got some things I'm working on. I need to pick your brain over anyway. So we're going to catch up. I appreciate you. And until next time.
All right. Bye.